Well, good afternoon. This is Kathleen Dudley, and I'm coming to you today to talk to you about health and healing. There seems to be a very big disconnect between what we can expect from our bodies and what our bodies actually do for us. I want to urge everyone to recognize that their body is a magnificent machine, that our own DNA structure that is unique to each one of us has the capacity for a very long time of well-being. But we short circuit that through our habits, through our lack of respect of our bodies. It's interesting to look at the blue zones around the world. There have been books written about them. I urge you to look them up. And the work of Dr. Joel Wallach, Wallack, has written a lot about the blue zones. And what we know of the people living in the blue zones is there are many centenarians living well beyond 100 years, some 150, some even 200 and longer. Oh, wow. How's that possible when in fact the longevity or the lifespan, the average lifespan in the United States of America for the average person, man, woman, or child, is 75.5 years? How's that possible? Certainly the lowest in the developed countries, far behind France and Italy. And yet the United States supposedly puts more money into research through the American Medical Association than any other country in the world. But then we have to look a little deeper. Dr. Wallach did some of his own calculations and found that the American Medical Association doctors lived an average of 58 years. Whoa, very interesting statistic. Now that was challenged by the very allopathic system. And I don't recall who did this study, but they came up with a range somewhere between 64 and 68 years. And even at that, it's lower than the average bloke who's a couch potato in the United States of America. So if we think about this, does it make sense that we would put our health and healing in the hands of a group of men and women whose average lifespan is less than the average lifespan of Americans? It doesn't to me. It probably doesn't to you, but these are probably new statistics, so all of this is new. What we have to take a look at here is how did we get to this kind of quackery where we put our life in the hands of the Allopathic Medical Association? Now, if we go back in history, our ancestors used their ancestors and their ancestors before those, they used their wisdom for health and healing. They ate with the seasons. They ate locally. They ate with no gluttony. They were thin. They were prudent in how they ate, because everything that they grew and traded was done, and it was a lot of work. So when people used herbs, they often went to the local curandera or shaman or the herbalist, or in the case of homeopathy, the homeopath. And homeopathy has been around for over 200 years. So we've had that system in place, not necessarily going back generations upon generations, but 200 years, which is no small shake. So what happened that all of that ancient fare, that wisdom, that knowledge has really been pushed to the wayside and considered now alternative healthcare, when in fact it was the main healing modality of the locals. Well, you're probably well aware that Rockefeller and Standard Oil are one in the same, and he made his fortune in the oil industry. Well, when the American Medical Association decided to compete with the healthcare, that the so-called alternative people, the herbalists and the homeopaths, they established themselves in this country. I believe it was about 1885. And in doing so, they really had a hard time. Because people were seeing the effects of the natural remedies, and they were seeing people healing, and they were seeing them recovering and becoming vital and vibrant again. Now, the American Medical Association uses a very different method. They look at the symptoms that a body expresses, and they look at that and they say, oh, that obviously is a germ, something outside the body that is, or a bacteria that must be squashed. So they came up with a toxic drug and they administered that to their patient. So their use of toxic drugs, and then also their surgeries, which would include often removal of a part of the body, some kind of dismemberment, disfigurement. And this type of medicine often had very immediate effects. So if there was a fever in a child, their toxic medicine cut that fever immediately. And so people thought it was magical, and they were duped by it, essentially. Because what a symptom is the body expressing its own healing mechanism. And what people have lost over the generations, over the millennia, is that the body knows how to heal everything, even a broken bone. It might not straighten that broken bone, but it can heal it. So here we have people who have absolutely vacated their own body's wisdom and gone for the trickery and the speedy recovery that these toxic medications can bring. So going into the early 1900s, Rockefeller and Carnegie Foundation pumped tons of money into the American Medical Association's campaign to build their fortress, because they weren't able to do it on their own. And as a result, the herbalists and the homeopaths were squished down to very few numbers by comparison. So that pie that once was basically holistic healing now became American Medical Association. And on top of that, Rockefeller had on staff a fellow named Flexner, and they hired him to go around to all the universities, all the colleges, and decide which one was going to be accredited, so that if you weren't deemed accredited, you had to close your doors. And those who wanted to study medicine and be considered a doctor had to go to an accredited university or college. And at that time, they closed down everything but one female accredited college. And of course, they then made a law that you could not say that you could cure a patient. Only a doctor from an accredited university or college could say that. Otherwise, you could lose your license, you could be thrown in jail. So it started off with tremendous duplicity, and it remains that way today. Some things about our bodies and health and healing, they're very simple. And it really begins with breath. Breathing is automatic. If we stop breathing, we die. Now, we can go on for quite some time without eating and even drinking, but not without breath. Most people, those who are not babies, toddlers, singers, yogis, Chinese, Tai Chi masters, etc., don't properly know how to breathe. When we're born, we breathe a deep belly breath. Breathe in and out from the belly. But then we learn how to breathe very shallowly from the chest, which does not fill our lungs, and it does not work to increase and bring about that full cleaning and of the release, and then the full intake of the oxygenated air. So it's very important. And I urge everyone to study voice, not just to discover their own voice, but to learn how to breathe again. It's crucial. The second aspect of health is movement. It's exercise. So in Tai Chi, the masters show us how to incorporate breath and movement to increase the qi in the body. Now, the qi is the life force in the body. The Chinese, in their ancient methods of health and healing, their Chinese herbs and their dietary protocol, they have known for centuries how to stay well. So we get our qi from our mother. That transfers to us in utero. But we must learn how to nurture the qi in order to stay healthy and vibrant and well. It is important to not accept that we live on average to 75.5 years old. We can live very gracefully to 100 to 120 and beyond. Our DNA has all that capacity. But we must learn how to sustain and increase our own vitality through how we meet the day and how we structure our day and what we do for ourselves, for our body, in order to be healthy and to heal quickly if we do develop symptoms, and to not get in the way of the symptoms, but to support those symptoms. Because in Dr. Hammer's German New Medicine perspective, the symptoms are the point at which the body is already healing. So when that fever is there, it's already decided what needs to be done in the body. It needs to burn hot. And then the body will burn off whatever air is there, troubling the mind and the heart and the spirit of that man, woman, or child. So holistic healing, it truly is about the mind. It's about the physical body. It's about the spirit, and it's about the emotions. And Dr. Hammer discovered that in his own life journey. Look up German New Medicine. It's a wonderful method of looking through the lens of how the body responds when it has symptoms, and how the body can heal if we support its process. So we must breathe, but we must breathe fresh air and clean air, good quality air. not polluted air of a city. We must make certain that at night we have airflow that's clean, that our body can take in through our mouth, through our nostrils, into our lungs, into every part of our body for rejuvenation. And then we must also understand the importance of exercise. That exercise is what brings in more air into our body and helps with the detoxification process, because there are always toxins. And so when we run or we walk quickly or we use a trampoline or whatever exercise we are doing, even in Tai Chi with the movement back and forth, moving the kidneys, moving the chi, that exercise is working the lymph glands. It's working the heart muscle. And if we think about just the body itself, its structure, the skeleton of bones, what holds it together? It's the tendons and the ligaments. It's the muscles. If we don't exercise, in time, we become weak and out of breath. And we wonder about why we're aging. You know, it's not a surprise. All of this takes discipline. All of this takes self-control, but it takes self-worth. Are we worth it? And fundamentally, at the bottom of it, do we have a purpose? Do we have a reason to take care of ourselves? What's our purpose and reason for taking care of ourselves? You know, many of us struggle with the fact that that purpose has been squished and squashed. Many people's essential businesses were closed down over the last 3 years. And we've had to rise up and become even more creative in finding ways to resurrect our own purposes or our own ways of being in the world again. But nothing like a new start. So when it comes to health and healing, we have breath, we have exercise, and we have what do we put into our body? Too many people put too much into their body. It interferes with the body's own stimulation, constantly turning it on and turning it off. Something good, something toxic. And the body is like a finely tuned vehicle or car, a Ferrari, Lamborghini. If you put the wrong kind of oil in or a contaminated gas that has water, what's going to happen to that finely tuned Lamborghini? It's not going to perform properly. And yet we think nothing of high fructose foods or the processed foods or just a lot of sugar or French fries with trans fats and GMO fats and GMO potatoes. And we don't seem to make a connection to down the road. We're just looking at, oh, I'm hungry, and oh, that smells good, and oh, I want some French fries. That's not a grown-up posture to take. So with food, we must truly be looking at, what does the food do for our body? Does it actually help, or does it deter in terms of its own mechanism of living from moment to moment, hour to hour? Are we in the way of its magnificence? And there are many theories on this. Some say that we shouldn't even need to eat food, the breatharians, for example. And then there are those who believe that it is just about drinking liquids. And then there are those who believe that it's just about being a vegan or being a vegetarian or being a carnivore. And I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that when I read about those folks who have healed from very serious illnesses, they stop eating. They go on long treks and they bathe in the rivers, in the healing waters. And then they might do some fasts having to do with greens or even fruit juices, but nothing cooked and nothing solid. And they heal. So there must be something to all of that when that process is incorporated into their healing protocol. What we do know is that after a heavy meal of meat and potatoes and all kinds of dairy product, we become very sluggish. I remember meeting a physician, retired physician, outside of Victoria, BC, British Columbia, years ago. And I was having breakfast that morning at the bed and breakfast, and we were talking, and his wife got up after eating, and he said, "Now, I don't get up for 15 minutes until I have, after eating." He said, because the greatest strain on the body is its digestion. And so I want to put all my energy into digesting my food. And that stuck with me all these years. And now I'm reading about how, of course, how that is a very known concept. There's a very fine book that I read this year, and it's called Toxemia Explained by Dr. John Tilden. And he talks about all the enervating habits that we have, anything that takes away from our vitality. And we think that when we eat, it gives us energy. But in fact, as this one retired physician proved, it actually doesn't give us energy. It actually makes us very lethargic. And we have to wait until our body goes through some level of digestion before we can then get up and go. I mean, we've seen that with school kids. They fall asleep, or even working people. They're very drowsy after a lunch and they come back to work, and they then start drinking lots of coffee to wake up. And if you'll notice, every business office throughout America and Canada, probably across the world, have coffee machines, free coffee for all their employees. And why is that? Because the caffeine, that enervating substance in caffeine, which is extremely addictive, goes into our limbic center and kindles our limbic center no differently than sugar or cocaine or heroin. It's astonishing, but the limbic center is the addictive center in our brain. And so we develop these habits to these enervating substances. Alcohol is another, because all the sugar that's in the alcohol as well as the alcohol, kindle the limbic center. And soon we have these neural pathways between the brain and the gut. And the messages are going back and forth, back and forth. Give me more, give me more. And if we don't take more, what happens? We go into withdrawal. It's a simple fact. We either go into a kind of a depression or withdrawal from caffeine, from that cup of coffee. We start getting symptoms like headaches or irritability, or sugar, the craving. And we must all know by now that when we're born, we have sweet centers on our tongue. The infant must have sweet centers on its tongue because it must suckle. And the breast milk is very sweet. So that Mother Nature gave this beautiful, interactive capacity for life to thrive. She thought of everything in the human body. So when we withdraw from any of those substances that have already kindled an addictive property in our brain, we struggle. Now, I had a little anecdotal experience because I love to use my own body, my own self, my mind, my psyche as an experiment before I work with anyone else. I want to do that because I want to feel it and I want to make certain that it's real. So I have been doing a ketogenic diet based on Dr. Eric Berg. You can YouTube him since 2017 at the mention by a friend. And at the time before I had started this, I was having significant pains in my hips and suffered from forms of sciatica as well. Within 2 weeks of following his protocol of no grains, no fruit other than some small amount of berries every day, and high amounts of green leafy vegetables and vegetables, which are high in potassium, which are very important for the body. I think we need 21 or 2,300 milligrams every single day, which essentially is equal to about 7 to 10 cups of green leafy vegetables every day. So a very large salad. How many people are doing that? And to also point out the fact that constipation is one of the #1 issues among Americans. I mean, wow, no one has to suffer. And it's an astonishing awareness that we do these things to ourselves. So I followed that protocol, and I found the healing tremendous. And what I realized as I read more about Dr. Berg's theories is that high glycemic diet is high in sugar. So not only do the carbs and the fruits have a lot of sugar in them, but they cause inflammation. And underlying most every disease and certainly symptom is inflammation. So when I removed that from my diet, those pains went away because the inflammation went away. And that was miraculous. So that was 2017, that was 6 years ago. And I find that it continues to renew me. But what I wanted to say as well is during that time, I've experimented with further concepts, and I have really cleaned my diet to a point of being extremely selective. I do not drink alcohol. I do no drugs. I use no medications. I will use herbal tinctures, things that I have made, companies whose products I particularly find are high quality, like Herb Farm out of Oregon. And I also will use gemotherapies, which is the energy made from the spring buds of plants. You can look up gemotherapies. It's a very fine therapy. And of course, I use homeopathy. Now, I noticed one day that when I put certified organic cacao nibs They contain no sweetener, no sugar. They're 100% cacao. And all my diet is all certified organic. When I put that on my breakfast, because it's considered a superfood, I mean, it tasted good. And I, being very sensitive to caffeine, I could feel the caffeine rush. And so I was even more efficient and effective that day. I noticed, however, that if the next day I didn't use them, I would get depressed. Now, I thought this was maybe coincidental or just incidental. So I tried this a few times. And sure enough, I would go back to my notes every day that I didn't use that caffeinated cacao. I became depressed. Not seriously, I don't have issues with depression, but I could feel it. I could feel my own self being less chipper. And I realized that, of course, that makes sense, does it not? If you have an enervating substance that gives you a high from stimulating the body unnaturally, even though it's a natural substance, and then you don't continue it, the next period of time, your body's going to go back to your normal state and it's going to fall. And that's what that depression was. And I found that fascinating. So even on something as minute as not having, 2 tablespoons of cacao nibs on my blueberries and, and MCT oil and walnuts. Wow. So that just goes to show, again, how finely tuned that Lamborghini is. That everything that we put in our body stimulates. Sometimes too much, and sometimes in a way that is extremely destructive. So anyone who is eating a diet full of junk food, high in sugar, and has symptoms that are being diagnosed by the American Medical Association, well, yes, of course, and really, shame on you, because you know better. And that we must learn to discern, we must have self-control. If we want to thrive, if we want to be well, because it doesn't take a lot, but it does take logos, it takes logic, it takes some education to learn that if we use enervating substances into our body, it's going to create toxicity. And that toxicity, according to Dr. John Tilden from Toxicity Explained, written in 1926, has to be eliminated. If it's not eliminated, it sets into full-blown disease. And then we go, wow, well, yeah, I guess I'm just another one of those, cancer people or diabetics or whatever. But we have been the ones who set it up. It's extremely simple. Discipline is something we all possess. Habits can be broken, but we have to have the will to live. And so my question to you, do you have the will to live vibrantly, without pain, for a long time, well beyond 75.5 years? I encourage you to join me. Let us stay well. Let us stay vibrant. You can reach me at my email below this video for consultations. I consult on a donation basis. I do not wish to be a part of the corporate fee structure. I look forward to consulting with you. I look forward to hearing how you are healing. And I thank you for listening to this video. Good day to all of you, and blessings.